In under a year and a half between 1996 and 1997, 18-year-old Sarah Spears, 23-year-old Jane Rimmer, and 27-year-old Sierra Glennon disappeared one by one in the same area of Claremont, a wealthy suburb of Perth. What started off as a missing mystery of a young woman in Claremont, Perth, soon came out to be something more serious as the investigation proceeded. Were these disappearances connected to each other? What actually happened to these young women? Hi, and welcome back to Cold Case Files. In today's video, we will be discussing one of the most notorious cases in the history of Australia, the Claremont murders. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to the channel, please go and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon down below. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Claremont is a western suburb of Perth. Claremont is surrounded by Airlie Street to the south, Alfred Road to the north, Lock Street and Bay Road to the east, and Stirling Highway, Congdon Street, and Stirling Road to the west. The majority of Claremont is primarily made up of residential areas, although there is also a significant shopping center along Stirling Highway, as well as the Claremont Showground and the eastern portion of Lake Claremont. The Claremont Showground and Claremont Oval, the Lake Claremont Football Club's home field, are also located here. There is also an important commercial district along Stirling Highway, primarily in the St. Quentin's Avenue area. Along with various bars, the area is home to the Claremont Hotel, On the Terrace, and Hotel Bayview. Hotel Bayview is the place where one of the most spine-chilling cases of Australia took place from 1996 to 1997. Sarah Spears was born on September 12, 1977. She grew up in a rural area of Western Australia where her father Don Spears was a shearing contractor headquartered in Darkin, in the state's wheat belt. As their children reached high school age, the Spears, like so many other rural families, sent their kids to boarding school in Perth, where Sarah eventually enrolled in Ionia Presentation College, which is located in Mosman Park. She joined the secretarial school after completing her graduation before landing a position as a receptionist at BSD, an engineering firm in Subico. She was living in a South Perth flat in 1996 with her eldest sister Amanda, to whom she was close to just as she was her parents. Jane Rimmer was born on October 12, 1972, to Trevor Rimmer and Jenny Rimmer. She was raised in Shenton Park and went to Rosalie Primary School and then Hollywood High School while working part-time in a deli close by. Jane worked as a childcare worker in Nedland, as she was fond of children and enjoyed their company. Later, she worked as a nanny for a family in Esperance. However, when her job there was complete, she came back to Nedland as a childcare worker again. Tragically, this was the time that she disappeared after having a night out with her friends in the Continental Hotel on that fateful night of June 9, 1996. Sierra Glennon was born on November 20, 1969, was raised in the wealthy riverside suburb of Mosman Park, and then moved to Perth when she was 6 or 7 years old. She was born in Zambia to Irish parents Dennis Glennon and Una Glennon. She received a highly sought-after internship at the legal firm Blake Dawson Waldron after graduating from UWA in 1992, with degrees in both law and Japanese. She started working there in early 1993. Her father, Mr. Glennon, described Sierra as resourceful, resilient, and strong-willed. She was acknowledged as a passionate woman with high spirits and possessing a great sense of humor by her friends. She disappeared on March 15, 1997, from Claremont. The case began on January 27, 1996, at about 2 a.m., when Sarah Spears left Club Bayview in Claremont, Western Australia after having a fun night out with her friends. At 2:06 a.m., she placed a call for a taxi from a public phone booth to request transportation to Mosman Park, a nearby suburb, to stay with one of her friends. But she wasn't there when the taxi arrived to pick her up at the location at 2:09 a.m. She was seen waiting by herself near the intersection of Stirling Road and Stirling Highway, according to 3 witnesses in a vehicle. The next day, none of her close ones got any updates from her. That was very unlike Sarah, as she was quite family-oriented and close with her friends. After the night of January 27, 1996, her sister never heard from her. That's when the case was taken up by the Major Crime Squad of Western Australia, after her family filed a missing persons report. The fact that it was 2:06 a.m. when Sarah called for a taxi, and she was nowhere to be found at 2:09 a.m. when the taxi arrived at the location, was alarming. What could have happened in just those 3 minutes? Sarah Spears' case was taken up by the Major Crime Squad within 48 hours of her disappearance. The department left no stone unturned when it came to chasing down leads. They were desperate for anything that would help the Spears family to get an update or any news related to Sarah's disappearance. However, nothing worked. Sarah was not found, and slowly Sarah's disappearance turned out to be one of those cases that goes cold with no leads for the crime department to follow through on. There was no physical evidence, no CCTV footage, not even a definite witness that would have given the authorities any information that could lead to the truth behind the disappearance of Sarah Spears. However, just 4.5 months later, another case with a missing young lady was reported on June 9, 1996 from the same area of Claremont. 23-year-old Jane Rimmer, who was a child care worker, was last seen in the Continental Hotel of Claremont after a night out with her friends. She had disappeared from a street in the area on her way back home. The Major Crime Squad was now able to see a pattern in these disappearances of young women from the same area, which led them to investigate thoroughly in the neighborhood of Claremont. Jane's family was as troubled as Sarah's family when she went missing from the same area of Claremont. In fact, just like Sarah, even Jane was quite close to her family and kept regular contact. Although she had moved out from home, she had a very warm relationship with her parents and would spend most of her weekends at her family's home, enjoying Sunday lunch together with her family. Jane was adored by her parents, and that reflected in her personality. The Major Crime Squad was looking for any possible clue, like eyewitnesses and taxi drivers who were either last contacted or witnesses. Till August 3, 1996, the disappearance of these two young women was just a mysterious missing persons case of Claremont. However, the case took a serious turn when Jane's body was found by a family in a bushland only 40 kilometers away from Claremont on the said date. The grim discovery was made by the Van Ralt Evans family when they were driving through semi-rural land in Wellard, which is about 40 kilometers south of Perth. Tammy Van Ralt Evans, the mother, strolled down a bush path as the kids played because she was attracted to the largest death lily she had ever seen. She noticed a person's feet while she admired the lily in what she called a bush cocoon, and as she looked deeper into the bushes, she discovered Jane, laying naked and hidden behind branches. After the body was discovered, the Major Crime Squad were notified, and a large team reached the location immediately to retrieve the body for autopsy and commence the investigation. Discovering Jane's body was considered the second phase of the case. The area where the body was found was investigated thoroughly for any clue that would lead to the killer. Police were hopeful that it might lead them to finding Sarah, as commented by Detective Paul Ferguson, who was in charge of the case at that time. Path West pathologist Clive Cook confirmed that it was murder, as a deep wound from a sharp object was found on her throat, along with defensive wounds, which suggested that Jane tried fighting back against the killer. Moreover, the forensic department could not retrieve any trace of sexual assault as the body was decomposed severely. In order to investigate the case, Western Australian police created the Macro Task Force. A telecom knife was found less than a kilometer away from the crime scene on Woolcoot Road, which proved to be the murder weapon. In addition, on the fateful night that Jane was killed, two couples who resided in Wellard told authorities they heard a lady screaming and shouting. After hearing a lady yell, "Leave me alone! Let me out of here!" Kenneth Mitchell claimed he saw a car drive off in the direction of the area where Miss Rimmer's corpse was discovered. In fact, in that same area, another couple told the investigators that they remembered hearing cries that stopped mid-scream. All these witnesses, evidence, and forensic results suggested that the murder was done using a sharp tool, which was likely a knife. However, the evidence did not confirm the murder weapon yet. Fast forward to March 15, 1997, 9 months after Jane Rimmer's disappearance. Another young woman, Sierra Glennon, age 27, disappeared from the same area of Claremont while returning home. After a night out with her friends at the Continental Hotel, Sierra was last seen strolling by herself on Sterling Highway in search of a cab at about midnight on March 14, 1997. The missing persons case was immediately taken over by the Macro Task Force. Her father, Dennis Glennon, attended a press conference where he appealed for help to find his daughter. He said, "The way she has been brought up, she will fight." On April 3, 1997, the corpse of lawyer Sierra Glennon, 27, was discovered partially buried in undergrowth in a bushland area north of Perth, just 19 days after her disappearance. Near Piccadilly Road in Eglinton, a tiny limestone trail led to the discovery of Miss Glennon's body. Former senior pathologist Karen Margolius observed that the body of Miss Glennon was discovered completely dressed. However, her black skirt looked to have been pushed up around her waist. She was decked out with jewelry, including a gold chain bracelet, earrings, a watch, and a navel ring. Prior to her death, Sierra Glennon was momentarily stunned by an object that broke her skull. She had a similar wound on her throat as Jane Rimmer. Forensics connected fibers taken from Miss Glennon's and Miss Rimmer's bodies and found them to be the same. They also found DNA beneath Miss Glennon's fingernails that they believed belonged to the killer. Her skin had split in a few places and her thumbnail was ripped and cracked. It is inferred that Sierra Glennon attempted to defend herself, which is how she sustained these injuries. Photos of the area were then given to the larger court, revealing a number of damaged trees where branches appeared to have been severed in order to bury Miss Glennon's body. The investigation continued, and it was clear after Sierra's disappearance that it was indeed the work of the same culprit. The Macro Task Force was now desperate to find the culprit and prevent another murder from happening. One of the primary suspects was Lance William, who was followed by the task force at 3 o'clock on a Sunday, as he was roaming around the streets of Claremont in his car. He was driving through the streets without any purpose, and certain strange behaviors like driving about after midnight and doing up to 30 rounds in the Claremont region made him seem suspicious to the task force. There were also sexually motivated behaviors like offering women lifts that contributed to the suspicion that was growing among the police force as they followed him. When the media and news agencies got a hold of him, they asked direct questions, which William answered without any hesitation. He was asked if he was the serial killer, which he denied, and then he was asked if he was innocent, which he agreed on. He was also asked about how his life had changed from the time he was marked as a prime suspect in the Claremont serial killing in the eyes of the police. He answered by saying it was quite distressing for him and his family.
I'll ask you a few questions. Are you the serial killer?
No.
Are you innocent?
Yes.
How has this surveillance affected you?
It's been very distressing on me and my family.
Although the police highly doubted the intention of Lance William, the absence of any evidence in the context of the forensics made it clear that he was not the same man the Macro Task Force was looking for. As the women were last seen in situations where they may have taken taxis, suspicion subsequently turned to Perth's taxi drivers. Among them was a driver who claimed to have picked up Sarah the night before she vanished. The hundreds of registered taxi drivers in Western Australia were then subjected to extensive fingerprint and DNA examinations. Considering the proof of several unauthorized operators, the eligibility standards were strengthened, and 78 drivers with substantial criminal histories had their licenses revoked. Also, stricter criteria were used to ensure that the equipment and logo of decommissioned taxis were removed. After months of relentless searching, there was not a single piece of evidence that could point the police in a definite direction to move in. In fact, in 2004, after 7 years of failing to find the killer, the WA police considered disbanding the Macro Task Force, but delayed this and waited for an independent review of the case. That led to some prominent raids within a short period. Police ultimately decided not to disband the task force. The report was subjected to several independent reviews over the years, including one by some of Australia's greatest investigators. The panel consisted of 2 experts from Australia, 2 forensic experts from the UK, and 1 psychological profiler. Was there a chance of getting the right lead that would help the investigators to identify the killer? Or was this case going to fizzle out? After years of investigating, the Special Task Force, along with the assistance of the finest forensic experts in the country, were able to identify one piece of evidence that gave a new direction to the case. When they ran a sample from Glennon's fingernails through the Western Australia database in 2008, they discovered that it matched the samples from a victim who was assaulted and was left alive by the offender at a cemetery in 1995. The fact that the experts at the time had access to all the evidence, which also included blue polyester fibers on the bodies of the deceased, was also something that gave them a direction to move in. Professor Barclay, the forensic expert in the Special Task Force, commented that the purpose of the review was to try and look for links of previous cases available on the database of WA Australia Police with the murders that took place in Claremont. It was necessary as it would help them get new leads and evidence that were not pursued before. With the discovery of male DNA beneath Miss Glennon's fingernails, WA Police made a significant development in the Claremont case after 12 years. Scientists in a specialized London facility applied a cutting-edge technique called low copy number analysis, LCN, which was unavailable in Perth at the time, to find the DNA in 2008. Brendan Chapman, a forensic scientist in Perth and a former crime scene investigator, revealed that since they lacked the sensitivity to identify a single copy of DNA, they used a procedure known as PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to generate copies of the same DNA for more in-depth analysis. A DNA profile was obtained due to such amplification. Moreover, in a startling turn of events, the sample matched DNA from private swabs obtained from a teenager who had been kidnapped in a park in Claremont and assaulted in Perth's Karrakatta Cemetery in 1995, the year before the killings had started. Now they had a suspect's DNA. Detectives combed through cold cases to see whether the murderer may have been involved in any previous crimes. An 18-year-old was attacked in bed at her family's Huntingdale house in southeast Perth in an unsolved case from 1988. The intruder fled when the woman yelled for her father. Although the intruder did not assault the woman, he left behind a kimono that he had stolen from a clothing line out of fear. The authorities needed to determine whose DNA was in the samples after they realized the two attacks were connected. They did this by analyzing a fingerprint that was collected from the Huntingdale property's doorknob in 1998. The fingerprints of Bradley Robert Edward, who had been on record after attacking a hospital employee in 1990, were discovered to match in 2008. This faceless man, who had been the mind behind the brutal killing of 3 innocent souls in Claremont, was named Bradley Robert Edward. Along with his parents, younger brother, and sister, Bradley grew up in Huntingdale. Bradley continued his father's career at Telstra by working there as a technician for the entirety of his professional career. Edwards turned into a peeping Tom when he was still residing in Huntingdale with his family. He started by stealing undergarments. Bradley, though, experienced his first run-in with the law soon before getting married. At Hollywood Hospital, where he was working on a Telstra project, he attacked Wendy Davis, 40, in 1980. Young Bradley, who was a Telstra employee, approached Wendy as she sat at her desk and asked if he could use the restroom behind her desk. Wendy responded by saying yes and continued to work. Wendy was abruptly grasped from behind and pulled hysterically in the direction of the restrooms. She fought back and gave the perpetrator a powerful kick. After letting her go, Bradley apologized. Bradley was arrested once the police arrived and he was ordered to undergo 12 months of therapy. A few days after the incident, Wendy was contacted by Bradley, who apologized for his actions. Bradley, nevertheless, kept his position. In actuality, he received a promotion shortly after. He gave the reason that his fiancée was forcing him to be married as an explanation for his actions at the time. They got married shortly after that. After marrying quite young, Bradley settled in a place that was close to his parents' residence in Huntingdale. But the union did not last long. Bradley's wife felt abandoned as a result of his obsession with his computer. She started dating when a male friend of hers moved in to help them with rent and bills. The wife left the house with her boyfriend in 1996. Soon after that happened, Sarah Spires vanished. A few months later, Bradley's now ex-wife called him to inform him that she was expecting a child with the man she had left him for. Jane Rimmer went missing shortly after that. Sierra's murder took place when he ended his relationship with a woman who he had been seeing during the first few months of 1997. Considering the matches to be significant proof, an undercover operation to collect Edward's DNA came next. He left an empty Sprite bottle outside the movie theater when he went to the movies, and when the cops saw it, they swooped in and obtained it for examining his DNA. DNA was taken, and it was apparently found to match the DNA profile of the unknown male that was found under Sierra's fingernails. This was the proof police needed.
Taken 20 years, but police say the hunt for the Claremont serial killer is finally over, with a suspect tonight behind bars.
And Bradley Robert Edwards, age 52, was arrested on December 22, 2016, and then was put on trial 3 years after the arrest. As the trial began, the prosecution requested that Edwards be tried without a jury in the form of a judge-alone trial. It was due to the case's prominence and the gruesome nature of the evidence. The application was approved. On November 25, 2019, in front of Judge Stephen Hall of the Supreme Court, the murder trial began. While the defense claimed the evidence was tainted in the lab, there was no denying that Bradley's DNA was also discovered under Sierra's fingernails and also matched the kimono. The Telstra work vans were one of the key pieces of evidence. It was alleged that Edwards, a technician at the time, committed the offenses using corporate vehicles after hours. A security guard who saw the telecom van stop at the Karrakatta graveyard on many occasions for no apparent purpose, both after the 1995 incident and before Spire's 1996 disappearance, verified this. Carmel Barbagallo, the prosecutor, said that between 1995 and 1997, a guy driving a Telstra station wagon stopped to look at ladies and offer them rides. The state submitted this evidence as part of the Telstra Living Witness Project case. The fact that the blue polyester fibers found at the crime scene on the bodies of both Jane and Sierra matched with the Telstra station wagon that Bradley owned only reaffirmed his direct connection with the murders. Edwards operated a Telstra-branded white VS Series van from April 1996 until December 1998. On the same day of his arrest, the car was located and seized. The defense argued that these fibers could have come from another source or another vehicle that was not listed in the WA crime database. But it was revealed during the hearing that the carpet fibers found in the back of Edwards' car matched those found on both Rimmer and Glennon's bodies. Bradley's defense team claimed that because Bradley's DNA had been present in the lab ever since the 1995 assault, the samples of Miss Glennon's fingernails that were taken throughout the inquiry were contaminated. Many of the scientists who worked at Perth's Path West facility, where the DNA was tested, were cross-examined by attorney Paul Yovich in court over their procedures. Edwards was a Telstra technician who primarily served the telco's government clients, and Mr. Yovich had speculated that Edwards may have been in the lab. However, with the help of the right witnesses and a series of well-structured pieces of evidence, the prosecutors were able to disprove these arguments. After 7 months of hearings and more than 200 witness depositions, the trial ended on June 25, 2020. After that, Judge Hall left the courtroom to reflect before delivering a decision before Bradley's detention in jail expired on September 24, 2020. Edwards was found guilty of the murders of Jane and Sierra, but not of Sarah Spires, in a 619-page written verdict delivered by Hall on the last day of detention, though it was more likely that Bradley was indeed directly related in her disappearance than not. Bradley was given a life sentence with the possibility of release after 40 years on December 23, 2020. The possibility that Hall will pass away in prison is high, according to Hall. Although the criminal, Bradley Robert Edward, was sentenced to 40 years of prison time, it is important to understand the psychology of the criminal. Ms. Barbagallo argues it is important because the date of the crimes and behavior directly reflected on the emotional distress in his personal life. The timeline was presented in the court later in the trial. The incident at Hollywood Hospital happened the day after Bradley learned that his ex-girlfriend had strayed in the 1980s. In 1994, Bradley's first wife started an extramarital relationship after he reportedly grew aloof and spent too much time on his computer. In 1995, January or February, her lover moved into their marriage house. The Karrakatta assault case was reported in the same year shortly after. Sarah Spears' disappearance in 1996, just a few days after his wife left him. Jane disappeared and was murdered just a few days after Bradley discovered his estranged wife was pregnant with a baby whose father was the same man she left Bradley for in 1996. In the second half of 1996, Bradley began an intimate relationship with a woman who was 20 years his senior. It ended in March 1997, and that was the time when Sierra Glennon went missing and was found killed. The prosecution claimed that no other murders were committed after Bradley met his second wife in April 1997, barely 1 month after Sierra's death. This timeline of events does give a clear insight into Bradley's state of mind while committing the crimes in Claremont. Nothing reduces the pain of losing a child. The parents and the family members of the victims suffered for years for their loss, yet they stood resilient enough to see justice being served. Although Sarah Spears' body was nowhere to be found, and Bradley bluntly denied the murder of the deceased, it was clear to the court that he was indeed the person behind the murder. However, the court could not offer any justice for Sarah's murder due to the lack of evidence. Yet again, forensic science and the police department stand out for their consistency in this case, which brought justice to the innocent souls that were butchered by this killer. In an age where people are losing faith in our existing justice system, this case stands out and offers hope for a system that still cradles morality and principles as the base. Tell us how you feel about this case in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, do like it and subscribe to the channel for more such content.